Today is Friday, May 16th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Is there revival unfolding in Europe? We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us as well, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. We're getting through the news of the cray here together each and every weekday, bright and early. We're so glad you're here with us. Joining me today, CBN's Billy Hallowell and Trey Goins-Phillips, and a lot to get to, always, we do on the podcast. And today, on the focus story, Trey, RFK is going after something pro-choicers might not be happy about.
Yeah, so the leading abortion pill, he's calling for an investigation into it after a pretty alarming study was released. So we'll get into the details here in a few minutes.
All right, that's coming up on the focus story. And then on the main thing, CBN's Nair caught up with Erick Stakelbeck to talk about Trump's Middle East trip and what's going on there, what he's trying to accomplish. They have all the details coming up on the main thing. All right, make sure you're subscribing to all of our CBN News podcasts. We're growing and adding more of them all the time, including CBN's Abigail Robertson, who now is hosting Heaven Meets Earth. Great podcast you want to catch. Billy's Newsmakers podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to that as well. Full-length interviews each and every day. You can find the links to all of those in the description of this podcast episode. And with that, we are going to head to the news in 90 seconds. And the Supreme Court signaled that it might allow President Trump's Birthright Citizenship executive order to proceed temporarily, even as justices decide its constitutional implications. The policy bars citizenship for children born in the U.S. to non-citizens, a move critics say violate the 14th Amendment. Conservative justices expressed concern over nationwide injunctions blocking presidential actions, with Justice Kavanaugh suggesting class action suits could replace them. But Justices Barrett and Sotomayor pressed hard on the practical fallout, asking how hospitals and agencies would even implement such sweeping change. The court appears divided, torn between limiting judicial overreach and the chaos of enforcing a potentially unconstitutional order. A final ruling could come by late June. And the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association is set to host its largest Christian evangelism gathering in 25 years, this time in Berlin. May 27th through May 30th, Franklin Graham says the goal is to reignite a bold, unashamed commitment to preaching the gospel across Europe, where churches are rapidly closing. This event will bring together over 1,000 pastors and ministry leaders from 55 countries, including Ukraine and Russia. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out more stories at cbnnews.com. And it's always interesting, guys, because we see stories of negativity on faith, but God's, in areas like Europe, right, it just feels very godless over there. But then you see things like this event happening and people gathering, and we'll see how the turnout is for it, but I would assume it's going to be a big one, because God's always moving in the midst of these circumstances. Just because a certain movement might be dominating headlines and the public perception in somewhere like Europe, God's still moving in those areas, and you'll see people coming to faith all the time.
Well, and I think we're seeing those patterns really shift, even in some of those countries, as you were saying, that have traditionally been losing faith, or even before America started going down that path of losing faith, at least nominally, we were already sort of joking, oh, well, we're going the way of Europe. And now it seems like there's this real sort of move toward faith everywhere, when you're seeing 2,000 young people show up in one night at a church, when you're in the UK, when you're seeing all of these moves. So whatever is happening is not just happening in America. It seems to be happening globally.
Yeah, I think, generally we consider Europe to be post-Christian. Wherever Europe goes, America usually follows a handful of years later, but it's also kind of difficult to cover these kinds of things, right? Because we can't really fit religion and faith and spirituality into voting block type conversations, but that's often how we end up doing it. But as Christians, we know that the kingdom of God is, of course, much bigger than all of that. And often we see in periods of great persecution or even spiritual darkness that's where the gospel is the most prominent, or where God does the wildest work in evangelizing people. So yeah, it's awesome to see. It will be cool to see the outcome of this this Franklin Graham evangelistic effort, to see what happens. Are there going to be people, or is it going to spark the same kind of spiritual awakening among young people, Billy, like you were saying, that it has on college campuses around the U.S. here?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And one thing for sure, CBN's going to be, we'll follow up on that. Absolutely. These are the sorts of stories we love checking in on, because we want to show you what God's up to around the world in the midst of the chaos. All right. We're going to head to the focus story now. And as we mentioned at the top, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had an order, and he ordered the FDA to review the abortion pill mifepristone. So what's going on here? Why did he do it? What are the details?
Well, Secretary Kennedy is kind of an interesting character, right? Because one of the biggest criticisms that was lobbed against him by pro-lifers and conservative Christians is that RFK Jr., at least in his personal life, has historically been pro-abortion, but he did say upon his confirmation that he would follow President Trump's lead on that issue. So he's been making some pretty, pro-life moves recently. He just called for the FDA to conduct a comprehensive review of mifepristone following a new study that was just released by the Ethics and Public Policy Center, which found that nearly 11% of women experienced serious adverse effects like sepsis, hemorrhaging, or other kinds of infection after using this pill, which you can get by mail now, by the way. This rate is significantly higher than what the FDA had previously and even currently estimates for adverse reactions. And the study is super comprehensive. They analyzed more than 865,000 insurance claims between 2017 and 2023. So this is the largest sample size of any kind of review like this ever done before.
So what are the concerns regarding the safety data of mifepristone? What are the people seeing there?
Yeah, so really the crux of the argument is that the FDA's labeling, a lot of pro-lifers have raised issues with, is that it underestimates the risks associated with this pill. Among others, Senator Josh Hawley, he highlighted that the rate of adverse events is actually 22 times higher than what the FDA currently suggests. Right now, the FDA estimates that 0.5% of people will experience adverse effects. With this study, like I said just moments ago, said that about 11% of the women who take them experience adverse effects. So in response to that big discrepancy, Secretary Kennedy has indicated that at the very least, the drug's labeling with the FDA needs to be revised to reflect this new data.
And how are pro-lifers responding to this news?
Obviously, pro-life groups, pro-life leaders are celebrating the fact that, one, this study has been done and it reveals some well-known concerns that have been out there but have not been substantiated to this degree. So they're celebrating the fact that there's now actually scientific data to back up these allegations about the dangers of mifepristone, but also they're celebrating Secretary Kennedy speaking out, and they're calling for the reinstating FDA restrictions that were in place prior to COVID. But when 2020 happened, the COVID pandemic happened, the mandatory in-person dispensing of mifepristone, which required your doctor to kind of walk you through that process, went away. And now you can get it by mail and you can get it shipped anywhere. And of course, pro-lifers don't want you to be able to get mifepristone at all, but they certainly don't want the policy to be so lax that anybody can get it anywhere. And not only is it, of course, horrifically terminating the life of an unborn child, but it's putting women in significant risk of losing their own lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's really shocking this whole thing is even allowed to be taken in the first place. I saw an incredibly unintentionally ironic post from somebody on the pro-abortion sides responding to this issue with the mifepristone, saying, thank you for not just discarding our lives. And it's just kind of like, are you listening to yourself? Not discarding our lives. What do you think is happening when somebody takes this drug? It's discarding life, and they just don't see it. And so I think, honestly, I've over the years watched all these debates that are happening on this issue, on the life issue. And I really think the number one weapon we have to have is prayer. I'm just convinced at this point, no, you can throw out, I mean, the arguments are great and it will sway some people who, you know, whose eyes are open, but I really think prayer is the only thing that works at this point because people's eyes are so glazed over. It's like they don't even listen to themselves and the things they're saying. They've just been duped into these positions and they just recite bumper sticker slogans without actually thinking at all about what they're saying. I mean, I love, and I'm forgetting her name, but the woman who made the video, the magic birth canal, because they're always like, well, life begins at, 18 weeks or whatever it is, they'll say viability. And so she's like the magic birth canal. And it's just a animation of a baby going through the birth canal. And it's like, not a baby, not a baby, not a baby, baby, like just this magic spot where it just becomes a life, it just doesn't make any sense. So anyway, all that to say is I am convinced prayer is the number one weapon we have.
I think there's a lot to say here. Follow the science until you're dealing with, a life-ending drug. Yeah. That's what it is. But the thing about this, and this is when you look at what Kennedy's saying, at least changing the label, because if you're putting a drug out that 1 in 10 people, more than 1 in 10 people purportedly will either bleed out, have some sort of major health issue, that would never stand in any other context. You would at the very least need to have a warning and a label. But this whole thing of, oh, it's safe, don't worry about it, oh, you're fine. This is why they don't make you go for, a sonogram. They don't make you go to see a doctor because they can convince women, oh, this is no big deal, when in reality, it's a huge deal. There's a medical issue that could happen to you if you ingest this drug outside of the fact that you're killing a baby.
Also,
it's insane.
If this was if this was another drug that had absolutely nothing to do with abortion, don't you think that the left would be completely up in arms? Like, this is the patriarchy. They are intentionally hurting women. They're not being honest about how dangerous this drug is to women. But because it's for abortion, it's for eliminating a human life. Who cares? Let's leave the belief that this is causing no harm, even though, like you said, Billy, more than 1 in 10 women are potentially putting their lives in jeopardy. Of course, never mind the human life that we're ending in the womb.
Yeah, exactly. It's a frustrating issue, but it's one that feels like it'll never have an end, but we got to keep praying and we got to keep speaking the truth into these situations. But appreciate you breaking that one down on the podcast today, Trey. And that's going to leave us heading over to the main thing right now. And President Trump just went over to the Middle East and he is working on deals. And there's not without controversy there, even though there's a lot of progress to be touted by the administrations. There's a lot of issues at play here. And CBN's Raj Nair is joined by Erick Stakelbeck, host of Erick Stakelbeck Tonight over on TBN, and they talk about Trump's trip to the Middle East and all the implications of it on today's Main Thing.
The President of the United States just met face to face with a former Al-Qaeda militant, the new Syrian president. Trump also just signed a $142 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia, and that is just the beginning. Well, Erick Stakelbeck, host of Stakelbeck Tonight on TBN, joins us now. So, my brother, there's an editorial on the Jerusalem Post that calls this whole Middle East shakeup a, quote, new world order. So this is a big deal. What say you about Trump's Middle East trip?
Yeah, it's absolutely, in a way, Raj, revolutionary, because President Trump, unlike former administrations in the U.S., is not necessarily holding these regimes to human rights standards. I guess you would say it's very transactional. And in a sense, look, President Trump is saying, I'm putting America first. He campaigned on it. And in his dealings with the Gulf states just this week, Raj, we've seen that close to $1 trillion in investment in the United States from the Saudis, the Qataris, and the UAE. Look, at the end of the day, that does benefit the American worker, American businesses. We've seen American business leaders on this trip with President Trump. So I guess you could say, Raj, it's kind of an emotionless foreign policy in a sense. And it's almost like the world is a spreadsheet, and it's very transactional. But I think President Trump, at the end of the day, is saying, okay, this is going to benefit the United States. I'm bringing money, I'm bringing commerce to America. That's going to help American families and American workers. It's a new way of doing it for sure, but this is the art of the deal. President Trump is a deal maker, and he's projecting strength once again, Raj, American strength on the world stage. Literally, the red carpet was rolled out for him in Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So a new day for sure. Let's see where it's all heading. A positive, I think, returns so far.
So President Trump, when asked about the new Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, said, quote, "He's young, attractive guy, tough guy, strong past, very strong past fighter. He's got a real shot of holding it all together." So this guy was the former head of Jabhat al-Nusra, a branch of al-Qaeda, and now he's meeting with the president of the United States. What do you make of al-Jilani?
Talk about a rapid rise, Raj. Look, just until a little while ago, he had a $10 million bounty on his head, courtesy of the United States. That tells you where he's coming from. This was an al-Qaeda guy, a jihadist through and through. Now he's the most powerful man in a very pivotal country, Syria, which lays right at Israel's doorstep, by the way. Look, this is the ultimate. I mentioned wait and see how this pans out, this new foreign policy approach. This is the ultimate wait and see. Let's see. Al-Jilani, also known as Ahmed al-Shara, he's even got two names. He's saying he's a new man. He's trimmed his beard. He's not wearing the terrorist garb anymore. He's dressed himself up in a suit and tie, and that's all great. But what about the intent? Look, since his regime took power in December, Raj, we've seen religious minorities in Syria targeted, whether it's the Druze, Christians, Kurds. So let's see if there's real credibility behind his words. He says he wants to, for instance, join the Abraham Accords with Israel, and that all sounds great. But is he the real deal, or is he a jihadist tool of Recep Erdogan in Turkey, Raj, who many think is kind of the real hand behind Syria right now and this new regime? So wait and see for sure. Sanctions lifted. Let's see. Let's see. Does he have nefarious intentions towards Israel, or could he truly join the Abraham Accords? In my experience, Raj, covering this for a long time, being on the ground in the region and even interviewing terrorists and former terrorists, the jihadi leopard usually doesn't change its spots. Let's hope that it's different in Syria. President Trump taking a big chance here, but he's doing it at the behest of those Gulf leaders, the Saudis, the Qataris, the UAE. They wanted Syria to join the community of nations, so to speak, once again. And last point here, Raj, this is also part of forming an axis, an arc against Iran. Remember, Iran basically controlled Syria for over a decade, and now the U.S. is trying to build an Arab anti-Iran coalition and flip Syria into the pro-West column. Again, we'll see if it can work.
The amount of headlines that have come out of this very short meeting are just staggering. And one that's made a lot of rounds is the idea that Qatar is basically trying to gift the president a $400 million brand new shiny Air Force One. That has caused a lot of people on both sides of the aisle to put up the red flags. What do you think about this move from Qatar?
Yeah, Qatar is a problematic regime, Raj. In 2017, President Trump himself, during his first term, said Qatar needs to stop funding terrorism. Well, guess what? They haven't stopped in the ensuing 8 years. They're the driving force behind financing Hamas along with the Iranian regime. So Qatar is problematic on many levels. I think President Trump is saying, look, if we improve business dealings, economic dealings with the Qataris, maybe we can talk some sense into them, offer them more investment in the United States. That remains to be seen. But look, with the plane, I don't love it because of the source. You think back, the French gave us the Statue of Liberty. This ain't the French. I mean, this is Qatar, again, which has been a terror sponsor in many ways. I'm not big on whataboutism, but I will say, Raj, in this case, with Democrats and the left howling about this, they said nothing, and they've said nothing over the past few decades when the Qataris have poured billions into American universities and have helped really lead or drive the tenor of what's being taught in American universities, which is, surprise, surprise, not friendly to the West and not friendly to Israel. So I don't love taking this gift from Qatar because it's Qatar and knowing their links.
So, Erick, you are one of the foremost people on all of YouTube that people go to see, the Watchmen newscast when they want to know what's happening in the Middle East right now. And one of the things that a lot of folks, subscribe to your channel for is to find out how this impacts Israel. So even though President Trump didn't stop in Israel, it's Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. How does this whole meetings impact the Jewish state?
Profound implications for the Jewish state, Raj. And President Trump said today on Air Force One, as he was in the air traveling between countries, that this is great for Israel. He said this is very good for Israel, this swing. What he wants to do, again, is, number one, continue to just forge closer ties between Israel and the Sunni Arab world as a bulwark against Iran and the Iran axis. And he talked about the Abraham Accords, Raj. Yesterday, he said in Riyadh, I want Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords and normalize relations with Israel. Of course, the UAE is already there. I don't think Qatar is getting there anytime soon, but we mentioned Syria a minute ago. Perhaps Syria joins the Abraham Accords. It would have been inconceivable just a few years ago, even a few months ago, but now it's all on the table. I think it impacts Israel in that way. These are rapidly shifting sands in what was already the world's most chaotic and strategic and prophetic region. And now it's gone into overdrive with President Trump. The prophetic chess pieces, I believe, are moving on the board. And I hope Israel is left stronger at the end of the day. The big question, all of this, Raj, twofold, I think. Number one, Gaza. What is the end game there? And the Trump administration would like to see the war over, but Israel's saying rightfully, hey, look, we're not done yet. We need to finish the job. But the big one looming over this entire meeting, to my mind, Raj, this entire Middle East trip, is Iran's nuclear program. And President Trump talked about it again. We just had 200 members of Congress, Republican members of Congress today, both in the Senate and the House, saying, look, nothing short of complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear weapons program will do. President Trump pulled out of a disastrous Obama nuclear deal in 2018, rightly so. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for him to now sign on to a similar deal that he pulled out of, which he called the worst deal in history, his words. So I'm staying optimistic. I'm giving President Trump the benefit of the doubt on Iran, given his first term, Raj, which was so incredibly pro-Israel and tough on Iran.
Well, the Middle East, to say it's changing rapidly would be quite the understatement. The fact that it's even in the concept of ideas that there could be a peace treaty between Syria and Israel and Saudi Arabia. The fact that El Al flights, in theory, in the near future could be stopping in Riyadh and Damascus, just wild. So obviously, Erick, we'll have to have you back on because things are changing by the minute. I mean, just hop on Twitter. It's like just when you thought, the biggest headline of the day happened, something else happened. So, Erick, you are a wealth of information. Love you like a brother. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Thanks, Raj. Appreciate it. God bless.
I appreciate that conversation, Raj and Erick. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast this week for one last thing.
We got Psalm 86:11. Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name. And that's really just the truth. We need to fear his name, have reverence, and be united to him, not to our own emotional whims, whether it's the abortion issue or any other issue under the sun.
And the way to know the heart and character of God is by reading his word and, involving yourself in spiritual disciplines.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. You're even reading the Old Testament through, you see so many descriptions like in Psalms like this. The character of God, exactly. You want to find out his will, find out what he's all about. Read the word of God, as you were saying. All right. That's going to do it for this week on the Quick Start Podcast. As always, get on over to cbnnews.com, faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, and that creek don't rise on us. We'll be back here on Monday with more. God bless. Have a great weekend.